Welcome to another episode of How Positive Are You, the podcast where we deliver such great news about HIV and AIDS that some people actually say we're in denial. I'm co-host Elizabeth Ely in New York. David Crow is on vacation. I'm glad you're with us because we're going to have some fun with the American legal system today, using words like accountability, fairness, honesty, malpractice, products liability, and the most wonderful word of all, damages. One of the things that always astonished me about the AIDS hoax was how it could cause all these wasted lives, wasted money, and wasted research, and the only lawsuits that came up in a legal database search were those where somebody was upset because they didn't get to take the drugs early enough. Nobody seemed to care, at least legally, if they were being forced to take the drugs, or were forced to get tested, or were suffering these nightmarish side effects. So how could anyone prescribe drugs with skulls and crossbones on their labels and not have products liability and malpractice attorneys swarming around like vultures? This is America, after all. I'm going to explore this and other questions with Washington, D.C. attorney Jonathan Dailey. Hey, can I call you Jonathan?
That's correct, you can.
Okay, great. Well, I'm going to give a short biography of you, or basically background on your work on behalf of HIV-positive plaintiffs, and then we'll get on to our questions.
Sounds good.
Okay. Mr. Dailey recently filed a lawsuit on behalf of a Kentucky man, Bobby Russell, who was diagnosed HIV-positive in 2004, took the so-called antiretroviral drugs, or ARVs, for 8 years with their attendant side effects, and then found out his test results weren't completely positive. Unfortunately for his doctors and hospital, Mr. Russell didn't have a very good sense of humor about that. He filed suit this past August. Previously, Attorney Dailey had represented another plaintiff in a wrongful HIV diagnosis case. At first, it was a simple matter of a so-called false positive, but he quickly noticed that this diagnosis lacked scientific validation at all. In other words, there is no such thing as a true positive. This was back before the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice was providing expert scientific witnesses to challenge HIV-positive diagnoses in court. At my last count, this assistance has freed 52 criminal defendants in so-called HIV transmission cases. If you haven't heard of this group, you need to check it out at www.omsj.org. I'll post helpful links, including this one, on our How Positive Are You page for this podcast. And there's one more lawsuit. This one is important because Mr. Dailey recently petitioned a court in Washington, D.C. to certify it as a class action on behalf of all the clients of a local public health clinic who were denied meaningful medical care outside of their HIV diagnosis. If that sounds familiar, perhaps it has happened to you, dear listener. I've always said that the AIDS establishment's worst nightmare is that an epidemic of common sense might break out. People like us might suddenly become infected by the quite reasonable idea that a test for antibodies doesn't actually find a virus, or the traditional societies in Africa aren't having more promiscuous sex than American college students, or that the virus doesn't jump from primates to humans. In fact, no viruses jump species. Even more scary to them must be the idea that smart people like lawyers might see through this. More precisely, smart people like lawyers who stand to make a lot of money when they do might see through this. So, for the past couple of decades, I've followed the fraud in HIV/AIDS research and treatment, and one of the biggest questions for me has been, where are the lawsuits? Why have there been none or very few?
Well, first of all, let's deal with facts. And the fact is that any clinician out there who's going to be testing for HIV or AIDS doesn't do the proper testing, from what I've seen in my experience. Okay, and that is a standard of care testing diagnostic protocol where you do multiple tests before you tell someone they're HIV. And, it's no different than telling me that I have lung cancer or testicular cancer or breast cancer without doing the right tests. What am I going to do as a result of not doing the right tests. I'm going to remove the breast, remove the testicle. I'm going to maybe I can do something positive like stop smoking. But the standard of care protocol for testing for HIV, which by the way, we don't even know it even exists, for the record. But we're just looking for the what's so-called antivirus, if you will.
The antibodies.
Yeah, antibodies, right, is not being conducted. And as a result, you tell me that I'm HIV positive, the only thing I can do is continue to be with people who are so-called HIV positive as well. There's nothing positive I can do. I can't quit smoking. I can't, if you tell me I have a cancer of the liver, I can't quit drinking. There's nothing positive I can do when you misdiagnose me with this so-called virus. All I can do is, continue my negative behavior. And that is, to me, the premise and the problem with what's going on right now in the medical. And it's also, it's highly funded by the pharmaceutical industry. If I have to take 12 pills a day because you tell me I have this so-called virus, then that just benefits, Merck. It doesn't benefit anybody else. And so there's a highly problematic system here with, number one, not doing the proper tests. You get funded to the federal government when you tell me I'm HIV, and then the pharmaceutical industry makes, millions off of the so-called virus. So that's my problem. And that's what's been going on in multiple cases that I've been involved in.
Multiple cases, not just the ones that I've mentioned.
No, not just well, there's multiple cases. Yeah, I have at least 4 cases where that has been the case. I mean, there's been multiple consultations, but you have to be careful how many cases you can take on. But I believe it's systemic.
Okay, but why have people not been wise to this? Why have they not been in droves seeking attorneys for these tests? Is it that perhaps they're using the proper protocol, and there's your answer? Don't go into denial. You have HIV. You're going to die unless you take these drugs. I mean, why aren't people questioning this?
It's a systemic misinformation problem. My current client was told he was dying of AIDS. That notify your family, pack your bags, you're gone. And then he went to the emergency room, and in 5 minutes they told him he was in a diabetic coma. It's just there's this problem with. He was dying of diabetes. He was in the hospital for 5 days, and now he's relatively okay, but he still has problems because they didn't properly diagnose him. There's just this knee-jerk reaction to the idea of AIDS and the idea of HIV based upon our recent culture that leads to the conclusion that you have HIV or that you have AIDS.
That if you are ill, if you present in an emergency room for anything, it's because of AIDS, and there are no other diagnoses possible.
Right, right, exactly. If you go in there and say, you're HIV positive, that's what you're diagnosed. There's no other possible diagnosis. There's no autoimmune disorder that you might have that can explain your symptoms. There is a knee-jerk reaction in today's medical facilities that just simply says you're dying of HIV.
Well, what do you say to those people who say, well, no, I got my test results and I even got the documentation behind them, as if most people actually do, but they don't. But let's say, they did 2 ELISAs and a Western blot, or 1 ELISA and 2 Western blots or something, and they got these numbers of bands, and they say you're in the risk group, and it's an open and shut case. Give it up.
Yeah, that's the horrible approach to a proper diagnosis. There's so many autoimmune disorders. I mean, hepatitis B, C. I mean, there's so many problems that can affect the immune system that, other than with so-called HIV, that need to be carefully diagnosed. In fact, my current client, in Kentucky, had hepatitis B. That's why his viral loads were so high. But they went out and told him he was HIV positive when he had hepatitis B. And they didn't do the proper testing.
Right.
They didn't do any standard of care protocol. And as a result, what can a person do, a man or a woman do, once you're told you're HIV? you can only engage in risky behavior, right? I mean, because there's nothing else you can do.
Yeah.
You have no positive choices. You have to, if you're told that, and my client in Washington, D.C., when he was told he was HIV positive when he was not, only engaged in relations with girls who were HIV positive. And luckily, well, the so-called virus didn't occur with him, but he suffered dramatically and traumatically for 5 years. And Mr. Russell did it for 8 years. So, there is a systemic problem that needs to be addressed.
Some people actually don't engage in riskier behavior when they get their HIV positive diagnosis, but they take it as a wake-up call to take care of themselves in other ways. I mean, they do actually take responsible action, although that is true. The possibility of picking up other viruses because you just don't care, or taking these drugs or ending up in the emergency room.
I'm going to have to cut you off there.
Yeah.
You've been given, when you're told you're HIV positive, you've been given a death sentence. It's an incurable disease, and there's nothing you can do to cure it.
Right.
And in fact, you can be charged potentially with murder, attempted murder, if you engage with people who are HIV negative and you don't let them know you're positive. So
I see.
I don't think there's really, to say that someone should go out there and be more positive and work towards more a healthy life once you've been given this so-called death sentence. I don't know if that works, because what are you supposed to do? You can't do anything positive unless you just become celibate, and have no intimacy whatsoever. And so your intimacy life is over. There's nothing else you can do. You have to go out, and if you're going to have relations with someone who knows you're positive and who actually is also positive, so-called positive. So it really is a horrible, horrible situation. It's, as I said, no different than telling me that I have testicular cancer. I remove my testicles, and I come to find out that the testing you did for that was flawed.
Right. They're like, oh, we were just kidding. Here's your testicles back. It's just like, well, some people actually do become celibate. Some people actually do become the angels of HIV. But, there's this propaganda around condoms, that condoms are the solution. Now, you can have normal sexual relations with your wife or your husband or random lovers, but you must inform them and you must use a condom. And, as long as that's done, we're all okay.
Yeah, no, that's not reality. That's not realistic.
What do you mean?
People
aren't using condoms, really.
People are not using condoms.
Okay, how do you know?
And that would be great in a perfect world, in a utopian society where I guess we all, wrap things up and protect it, fully that way. It's just not reality.
Well, we're talking about our sex lives here.
Yeah, exactly.
We're
and that's
not
why
talking
it's not
about
reality.
our work protocol or, what you do from 9 to
Right.
5. We're talking about your feelings and all those messy things going on. And they don't seem to get that, or they do seem to get that in the AIDS establishment. And they have whole industries rising up around, how to manipulate people's psychology so that they don't act like normal, irrational sexual beings. In fact, there's a psychologist at the University of Connecticut who specializes in the area, and I've looked at his CV, and it's just like, what does this guy do? Write a paper every day? I mean, for the last 20 years, he's really prolific, and there's a lot of research into that, to how to control people. It's just it's like that.
You're certainly going to affect your autoimmune system with risky behavior. I mean, there's no question about it. It's from anything from drug use to cigarettes to alcohol to risky sex, and it's going to affect your autoimmune system to affect where you might, suffer a catastrophic problem. But it's not necessarily HIV.
Right. Here's what they're saying. You're going to die. Don't bother to do anything outside what we're telling you to do, which is, by the way, taking these toxic drugs. And by the way, try not to feel any stress. And when you do, try not to drink too much or do drugs or have too much sex or or do anything that you usually do to cope. We're talking about certain risk groups here that are even more likely to run to those things when they find out that they're HIV positive or they're going to die. I mean, it would stress me out. I mean, I would go out and, I don't know, have a bender on chocolate, I suppose. I'm pretty mild-mannered, but we're talking about people who are intravenous drug users. Like you're just going to wake up in they're just be in a coma the next day from heroin. This is
Yeah, no, 100% true. Listen, when you're told you have an incurable infectious disease, okay, your life of intimacy is over, and you're going to die from this incurable disease. What are you supposed to do? I mean, I guess, in a perfect world, you take out your bucket list and you go to Paris or something like that, and you walk the streets of Rome. But, most people are inclined to do something, negative, because because you've been given this death sentence. So don't give the death sentence.
on the positive side. Mr. Dailey, you're going to die in 6 months. Here's a referral to a support group. And then you go on one of these websites and you report that you didn't know how much people loved you until you were diagnosed with HIV. Therefore, it's a blessing. Why would you sue anybody? I mean, it's just, they finally gave you the wake-up call in life where you can go to this place and you can get 8 hugs all around the room and, free cookies, and you have people who love you now. It's a positive thing. As one guy has a website. It says, my fabulous disease.
Listen, I've brought 4 lawsuits in this case, and I've consulted with multiple clients, and every story is the same. When they're told that they're HIV positive and they have to inform their family, they are completely ostracized. They are outside the loop. They just push them away. There's nothing positive. I don't know how you can't dance around the idea of there's something positive that comes from this diagnosis, especially when it's a misdiagnosis. It doesn't even follow standard of care protocol. And then there's a question of whether or not the diagnosis itself actually exists. You can't dance around the idea that there's something positive that results from that, because there's nothing positive, and there's nothing. You can't go back to your family and say, "Oh, I have this," and then you're going to use their toothbrush or whatever. No, it doesn't work that way. That's not reality. We have to deal with reality, and reality is that this death sentence reverberates across every social barrier that you have, and there's nothing you can do about it. You literally are hopeless at that point. Now, if you want to try to be positive, that's great. I mean, great. Good for you. Be positive. But that's not reality. That is not reality.
Well, a person like me, who may not be a person like the kind who seeks an HIV test, is going to suddenly get positive about my life prospects and file a lawsuit. That would be my response to, getting out of this denial. And by the way, they say we're in denial. I think we're describing the biggest kind of denial you can, where you're looking at someone telling you you're going to die, and you're going to support groups, to try to deal with that instead of questioning your diagnosis. But my original question stands. Where are the lawsuits? I mean, you have only 4 clients. Are you bolting down your door, keeping the zombies from coming to your office?
No,
I mean,
we're actually filing a class action against the Women Walking Clinic in D.C. So we're gonna uncover the stones, okay, and we're gonna reveal the truth.
So it's just that people are so brainwashed by all this propaganda that they're like, oh, I have no other options. I mean, they actually believe what they're being told, so they don't even bother to call up a lawyer. But now they're going to be educated.
You just hit the nail on the head. Once you're, I mean, come on. I mean, we trust our doctors so religiously. We never question them, him or her. We simply just take what we're told. That's their job, actually, to give us correct information. We rely upon them. It's no different than talking to a lawyer in a criminal defense matter where you've been, charged with a crime. You just listen to the lawyer, and he or she says that this is what you need to do, and you take it as religion. And that's our job as lawyers, and that's the job as doctors. And they're not doing their job in this HIV posture, and they're heavily funded by the pharmaceutical industry and heavily funded by the government. And there's this myth out there that needs to be addressed, at least scrutinized. How about have a debate? Have a debate discussion, because we have experts on our side who will absolutely confirm the theory that the HIV as it's being tested is unreliable to tell you that you have anything wrong other than a different disease, and people then suffer under the diagnosis of an infectious incurable disease, and their lives are basically over. I mean, this matter has to be addressed and revealed to the truth.
Right. Well, I think that's their worst nightmare, is that lawyers will get involved. And actually, it's becoming our worst nightmare because, the conversation that I had with David Crow years ago about, well, what would happen if we win? He'd say, oh, we'd be overwhelmed. There would be so many people worldwide who want to sue, who need competent medical care, and where would we find that? We don't have enough lawyers on roster. We don't have enough doctors that we can refer people to, and in some cases without risking those doctors' licenses. It's, where are you rethinkers when we need help? And we're like, we didn't see this coming. We didn't see that people would be coming to your house and taking your baby right out of your arms. We weren't prepared for that. But you're talking about these doctors and how they have to be responsible. So basically, you are suing doctors. I mean, who are the defendants in these cases? They are hospitals. They are certainly not pharmaceutical companies, because I think there was a recent decision on this. And if you could explain that would be helpful, because I don't believe it's possible even to sue a pharmaceutical company anymore.
You would have to sue a pharmaceutical company. You'd have to do it almost on the class action basis, because an individual going against the pharmaceutical industry would be almost absurd, because the lawyer would be facing 10 lawyers on the other side for one case, and you have to prove exactly what that drug did and whatnot. It wouldn't. It's unfortunately, it's a sad truth, but it's uneconomical for a lawyer to take that kind of case. For the pharmaceutical industry to be confronted, it's going to be like the tobacco litigation. It has to be on a class action basis. And that's coming down the road. That's coming down the road. We're getting ready for that. And I'll tell you right now, in speaking with infectious disease specialists, as I have spoken with many over the past 20 years of my litigation, they resoundingly tell me that there is, they say, for example, that there's 10% of the population that doesn't respond. If you get HIV, you somehow have some cure within yourself, so that the HIV doesn't come out, so to speak, or you don't respond to the HIV. It's like a I don't know. It's being responsive to any kind of diabetes or something like that. You just don't respond. And where did that come from? There's no basis for that. 10% of the population doesn't respond to HIV. And that's why that's how they explain how certain people don't die.
That 10% doesn't respond to HIV propaganda. Maybe that's it.
That's probably it. But I literally, when I talk to infectious disease specialists, who, by the way, make all their money on diagnosing people with HIV, they resoundingly stutter when I ask them questions about, why is it that people are not dying of HIV? What exactly testing should be done? They start stuttering. I mean, literally stuttering, because they have to, keep this propaganda up for their own. They want to send their kids to private school. They want the pharmaceutical industries to give them kickbacks. So it's just a constant, circle of mistrust.
Right. Well, I wonder if they're really that cynical. I mean, in a lot of cases, perhaps they are. But, I just talked to Tricia Morrison, widow of Tommy Morrison, and, she confronted a few doctors. And she had the documentation right there about how the Roche Diagnostics Corporation doesn't say that the viral load test picks up any virus and doesn't diagnose a disease, and she went to this guy. He was arguing with her, the attending physician. He was arguing with her and saying, give it up. Here's the viral load test. You need to stop this. And he'd walked out of the room. She got the email. She calls him back in the room, right? She has a flair for drama, and she says, here you go. And he just kind of looked like, I don't know, I wasn't there, but maybe stunned, there's a train coming at him. That, wait a minute, I've been practicing this kind of medicine for 30 years, and I never heard this before, which I find rather incompetent for starters. But I think they're in a sense sort of brainwashed. They themselves.
If I work in the area exclusively of breast cancer, okay, and breast cancer is obviously a very severe, real disease. It's verifiable and it's severe, and there's a protocol to test for it and say if you do or do not have it, and it's real. But if I work in that area, and let's just assume for a second that someone says, "Listen, I don't think breast cancer really exists," I'm going to still keep fighting for breast cancer because that's my entire existence. Now, I'm not trying to make this is apples and oranges kind of thing because breast cancer and HIV are apples and oranges. But if I believe in something as a disease and it's my entire career, it's my entire profession, it's my life, it's the reason I can send my kids to school, I'm going to keep believing in it. So this is why this is the biggest challenge of HIV is that everyone believes in it. And that's the challenge.
And there are people who specialize not just in infectious disease, but specialize in HIV/AIDS. That's 100% of their income. And as you say, they get money for diagnosis. Can you speak more about that? That the more they diagnose, the more money they get? You mentioned something about that clinic in Washington. And, there's this ka-chingy machine that just goes ka-ching, ka-ching every time you tell somebody they're going to die.
It's the Ryan White program. And every time the WWC, Milwaukee Clinic, diagnoses them with AIDS, HIV, they get additional funding. Not only that, though, I think that the larger picture is the pharmaceutical picture, that the pharmaceutical industry benefits so much from every diagnosis. Erectile dysfunction is Viagra, right? That's one pill, and they still make billions off of that. But now think about 15 pills, not one, 15. And then, how much they benefit from that. So the power behind the pharmaceutical industry in this case is just huge. And it's going to take, someone like me to stand up and say enough's enough. This is ridiculous. You're killing people. These drugs, AZTs are carcinogens. I mean, they cause cancer. And you can't keep pumping a guy or a girl full of pills just because you want to make a buck.
If I go into the emergency room with a broken ankle and I'm uninsured, I'm not necessarily out of luck. They might cut me a deal, but I'm going to get the bill. Okay, but with HIV/AIDS, you're dealing with people who are even less insured than I am, less employed in a lot of cases. You're dealing with people who are rather marginal in society for the most part. And who's paying their bills? Well, that's an even bigger ka-chingy machine because then you've got Medicaid and Medicare and government involved. And it's just like writing checks directly on the U.S. Treasury. There's billions of dollars invested in research, but probably just as many billions of dollars invested in insuring people who are uninsurable and paying their medical bills for these ridiculous diagnoses. Medicare fraud alone is like even a separate area where they would even just make up diagnosis on people that they've never even seen at their clinic. They just have a Medicare number that somebody sold to a drug dealer on the street, and that person gives it to a clinic in say Florida, and they start writing out things and generating fake doctor's visits, or sometimes they'll have buses pick up people at locations and bus them in. I've read an article about this. It's fascinating. And that just the amount of fraud there, the amount of money is such a mountain of money that, it's just a temptation.
The temptation is absolutely there. And there's such a financial incentive behind all of this. And Medicare fraud, Medicaid fraud is absolutely a direct example of that. And that occurs all the time, and we all know it. But there's a great movie, Eyes Wide Open. I think we're approaching our medical system as eyes wide shut, And
well, especially in the case of something called AIDS, where you've got all this propaganda, all this warm fuzzies, anytime you see people marching in a parade about something and wearing ribbons and things, that to me is a big alarm saying, no accountability zone. Whenever it's it's painted in all these beautiful rainbow colors, and you must support this, and it's just your duty as a citizen. That's an open door for fraud.
That's an absolute open door for fraud. I mean, the blanket across the constitutional mall area for AIDS, any concert that's given, any benefit that's given, everything is going to compel a person to say, wow, this is something really sympathetic and serious, and I have to be, respectful and courteous of this. But at the same time, that's so counterproductive to the idea of, does it actually exist? Is this something that's really happening? Because once you are forced, when you have a blanket across the mall, between the Lincoln Memorial and the Washington Monument of people who have passed, how do you contradict that? You can't. Emotionally you can. Intellectually you can, but emotionally you cannot. So it's a really, really pushing a rock up a hill battle.
Right. So somebody like me walks into the National Mall when they're laying out a quilt or something, and I go, this thing doesn't exist, and they're like, killer. It's just like.
Oh, that's it. You would probably be arrested.
Yeah, I would I would be arrested if I'm lucky. The lynch mob that would kill me otherwise would be worse than being arrested by the DC police.
You would be either metaphorically or literally assaulted. Sure.
Yeah, for sure. And of course, all of us who are rethinkers have had the experience of suddenly realizing this doesn't exist, and then you tell somebody, and then you're not prepared for the barrage of insults and scariness that comes at you. It just you get these calls in the middle of the night where people are like really, really upset at you. Yeah, in my case, it was like all hell broke loose in my church. But so against this, you've got this amazingly good cause that everyone believes is a good cause, and against this, you're standing going, well, this thing just doesn't exist, and you expected a different response. It's not just propaganda. Propaganda is putting it mildly. It's something that gets into your sex life, our very culture, and everything intimate about human beings. It pushes all the buttons.
It does.
And then in the midst of that, you as a relatively powerless person in this society are walking into an HIV/AIDS clinic. You're scared. You're feeling some shame about, oh, I had this really awful sexual encounter with this really smelly person who might have given me cooties, and you're not in a position to argue against this whole rainbow beautiful thing. And then somebody gives you the 2x4 by the side of the head and tells you you're going to die. So the next move you're going to make is suing somebody?
To your listeners, I've litigated multiple cases, and I've consulted on multiple cases as well, where there's just been a straight-out misdiagnosis, and it's based on some sort of negligence that's beyond. It's unspeakable. It's unspeakable to tell somebody you have an infectious incurable disease based on a misdiagnosis. Number one, but number two is that we have to get to the bottom line question of, is this testing even reliable?
Are there any true positives? Aren't they all false positives? Even if they've done all, they've
Right.
dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's, and you get, an ELISA and 2 Western blots, and then we follow up with a viral load that tells you you're screwed. I mean, even then, there are problems with this testing. There are problems.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And when people start to realize that, not just the obvious case where, the guy looks into his file and finds out that there was just one ELISA and there was, 2 Western blots that came out negative, if it's not even just limited to that guy, this is going to be a barrage of lawsuits. So where can people find lawyers? I've talked to people who want lawyers for various things, not even just challenging their diagnosis.
Just like the tobacco litigation, I think this is going to take on its own new life of its own. Lawyers are hesitant because they don't want it to be perceived on the fringe. And this is, and even suing tobacco, if you think about it, years ago, might have been being perceived on the fringe, right? Everyone can buy a pack of cigarettes and smoke and do what you want, so how could you possibly sue tobacco? But it was done, and it was done on a huge level. And I think this needs to be, staged on that idea. It's that, let's get to the truth of what's really going on. Let's get to the bottom of it. But it's going to take some brave lawyers. And you're right. If a person walks out of a clinic, told they're HIV and not sure about it or whatever, to get to a lawyer is going to be tough.
Even to make that decision to go to the lawyer, let alone talk the lawyer into it, who's going, okay, a real wacko just walked into my office today.
Yeah, no, the lawyer has to read the medicine. Yeah, I've read the medicine behind this, and I know in my heart that this is a complete misdiagnosis across the board. But a lawyer has to read the medicine before he'll take it, and he or she might not take it because they work for a big firm, and that's totally not acceptable to the firm.
He's got to take it before his partners. Hey, I got a bunch of junkies and racial minorities and poor people, and we're gonna take the government to court or doctors to court saying HIV doesn't exist. Yeah, okay.
So we're going to challenge years of medical history, so-called, on behalf of this firm, and see what happens to this firm. This firm is not going to allow that associate to take the case, and that is the problem. Unless you get someone who's independent, like I am, it's hard. It's hard to challenge the establishment.
So you should really be looking for independent single practitioners or people who head up small law firms in these areas. Right, that would be the first place to look.
You need a hard charger, someone who's an independent thinker, who will examine the evidence, examine the science, come up to his or her own conclusion, and then take on the establishment. And that's a hard order to make, but that's what it's going to take.
It's not going to pay off your law school loans right away. It's not going to be.
That's right.
Although eventually, this is going to be huge money. The thing is, you talk about reading the science. I'm sure that a lot of, personal injury and products liability and malpractice attorneys are used to reading the science. But I should mention, if any of them are listening here, that, if a doofus like me can figure it out, you can too. Because, for me, it was just a few basic facts. Here's just one of them. The test doesn't find virus, and it doesn't claim to. And it has a disclaimer inside it that says it doesn't diagnose a disease. What more do you need? It finds antibodies. How it literally works is that it doesn't even just find the antibodies, it tries to measure the concentration of them, and these are proteins that are found in everyone's body. And why they are in higher concentrations in some people rather than others, there are a lot of theories out there, none of which have anything to do with one special virus causing those antibodies. And there's a list of 70 to 80 things that's been made public. There's even a private list of 100 things that you can get a hold of if you're a lawyer, that list things that cross-react to the test. Okay, and the other side does not contest this. Whenever they're asked to contest this, they cut and run. Boy, this will be not billable hours. This will be a verdict open and shut, or a settlement open and shut, because these people run. That's how easy it is to get this. The basic logic does not line up. So if they're thinking, I'm going to be, for the next 5 years studying medical books, I'm sorry, it's easier than that.
You can just Google, and you can just go on and ask in Google. You can go through the science, and there's so many publications that discuss how the question of the existence of HIV. Just a simple Google search can show you that. And there are really advanced publications that demonstrate the fact that this testing is completely unreliable. And it's a simple search. You don't have to spend 5 years researching medical literature. It's a simple search. It can be done easily, and within an hour you can read. If you take the time, you have to take the time and actually read the articles that demonstrate, and the medical publications that demonstrate that this testing is completely unreliable.
Right. We use their own research. We don't do our own research as for the most part, as dissident scientists, like the Rethinking AIDS group, people like that. They do some of the people involved do their own research, but most of it is mainstream research, and they're not finding what they want to find. And in one case, I found a very famous scientist who cited another scientist's work to support a point that work was actually proving the opposite of. It's so easy to find the scientific fraud here that even, like I said, even a doofus like me can find it. A lawyer should be within a couple of hours should have this down.
Yeah. I have all the articles. I've researched all the articles that I need for my cases, and yeah, but that's what I do as a lawyer. But your listeners need to know, and the people need to know that they should take a minute and take a look at it and see and come up with their own informed judgment.
Right.
Because the facts are what the facts are.
Right.
And if they really take a look, if they just don't buy into the whole systemic belief of what's been told them, propaganda out there for the past 25, 30 years, whatever, they will find an informed decision.
Right. And we should stress that there is a difference between facts and opinions. And so much of the time, the other side is depicting us as a bunch of people with flawed opinions when they have the facts, when all we just do is look at facts. And if this fact plus that fact equals unavoidably fact number 3, then that's where we are. It's not like the law of gravity is up for debate. I'm going to jump out that window because I heard it was safe. No, it's how does the law of gravity work? So I think also that you're going to have to educate lawyers to even be educated to look into it in the first place, to have the interest in looking into it. And I think that Clark Baker of the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice has started to do just that in terms of CLE programs, continuing legal education programs. He did one, I believe, in Tennessee a year or so ago. I think he's seeking other ones to do. These are programs that lawyers have to do to renew their license. They have to do a certain number of hours in CLE seminars where they have to sit there and go, I already know this. Well, how about taking one that's really interesting on the law of HIV presented by someone like Clark Baker, who I think is the only one doing it, and there you go. Like that might bring more lawyers into the possibilities.
100%. Clark Baker is advancing this. Well, I think is revealing the truth of what's really going on. 100%. There's other people though as well, in addition to Mr. Baker. But you're right. It's something where it's pushing a rock up a hill, and it's so tough. But at the end of the day, you don't. If you have a protocol for testing for cancer, whatever it is, breast, testicular, lung, liver, whatever, and the protocol's wrong, and it's not, you don't really have that problem that you think you have, that is the moral imperative. The moral imperative is to say, you know what, enough is enough, and to start questioning, just because any financial, pharmaceutical, whatever industry is behind it, just because it's been accepted, just because you say it's true, that doesn't make it true. So back it up and face it, and that's the part that Mr. Baker and myself are confronting, and are confronting as well, is that we need to challenge the industry.
Right.
And that's what we're doing.
Well, you're talking the language of law, okay? You're not talking the language of warm and fuzzy AIDS counselors or activists or anything like that. The language of law is put up or shut up. It says if you can't prove this in court, then you don't have a case. So we win in court through legitimate evidence. That's the power of this approach. And on the other side, they're suddenly being exposed as a PR campaign without a disease. It's so strange that they talk about everything except the credible science. They talk about gay rights, they talk about safe sex, they talk about how, I was never loved until I got HIV. They talk about danger. They talk about access to medical care and drugs. We have to, a chicken in every pot. We have to give every kid, to sprinkle this on their breakfast cereal because they're poor kids and they might not get enough drugs. I mean, it's just all kind of all fluff, all dance, all hat, no cattle. And what happens in a court of law is you better show the cattle. You better put up or shut up and show us the evidence.
That's exactly right. To put up or shut up, it's so funny to use that phrase because that's been used in my case in Kentucky, and that was before even discovery was, have evolved and facts were actually shown. They're like, put up or shut up, but we haven't even started the case yet. That's how heavily influenced the industry is on this idea that HIV exists and the fact that the diagnosis and the testing is proper. They're so heavily funded that they can actually say to me, put up or shut up before we even start the
So
case.
they actually use that terminology.
When it comes to my case, I'll be forced to test and put up or shut up, and I will. I'll put up.
Yeah.
But they're so heavily influenced or financed by, I believe, the pharmaceutical industry that they're already asking in my case in Kentucky to dismiss the case, and that was denied. The court denied that.
Right.
So now it's my chance to put up, and I will.
Yeah, you will. Well,
Yeah.
I guess we've kind of come to the end of a lot of comments here.
Okay.
There will be more time, but I just kind of wanted to go into for our listeners, and please jump in there if you see an opportunity here. But for our listeners who may want to sue, and some of them, they don't have this egregious case where they can prove that, like Bobby Russell did, that they just looked in their file and found no real diagnosis there. But there are a lot of reasons why they might need legal help, and most prominently recently, we've had the idea that people can get their diagnosis reversed, even if these people are claiming
Right.
they dotted all the I's and crossed all the T's and followed all the proper protocol. And we've had people just, like, do we have your attention now? Oh yeah. They're like, where do I go? What do I do? To not just to sue, but to just simply get their names off the database with their state, so that if they go to the emergency room with a legitimate emergency, they won't suddenly be told they need to take AZT for a broken ankle or something. So
Right.
I need to inform them that first they have to document their false diagnosis, or more commonly, that it wasn't really a diagnosis at all, because uh, it's the diagnosis is commonly not one that any doctor, clinic, or hospital is willing to verify in writing. They see the writing on the wall. Okay, they don't like to put anything in writing, because that to them means lawyers, and doctors are allergic to lawyers. So there is a difference between a test result and a diagnosis. And so just getting that test result does not constitute a diagnosis. The doctor actually has to put in writing or say to you on the record that there's room for interpretation, and they have to look at that as a competent professional and interpret your test as positive or negative. And so, exploiting that fact, you can write, or you can have the Office of Medical and Scientific Justice write for you, for a fee, the letters to your doctor or your clinic or whoever it is who's telling you this, that they need to verify this with you. You use certain language in these letters that really nails them to the wall. And people have been using these letters to write for confirmation of their diagnosis. The only results I've heard so far are that they just don't answer back. And people are like, well, see, it didn't work. People need to understand that in the law, as I understand it, the lack of an answer is called basically a default, and means you probably win on that point of fact. I mean, maybe they might be able, if you took it to court, they might be able to, like, explain themselves. But basically there's this concept that if you don't answer, we have our answer, that you're not willing.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I agree with you. I would say this. There's two parts to this equation that I think should be addressed. Number one is just the personal, private part, which is where if someone tells my wife that she has breast cancer, we're going to get a second, we're going to get a third and a fourth opinion, okay, before taking further action. All right, that's number one. So if you get that diagnosis, of course, you need to just get consulted on multiple levels. But number two, more importantly, is that I think, you do have to reach out to like Mr. Baker's organization or something like that, because there are specific doctors that I work with that I know, and all the research that I've done. I mean, you can reach out yourself, but to say that, listen, all these results that you've been given, it doesn't demonstrate anything. It doesn't demonstrate anything. Okay. Now you might have another problem. You might have diabetes. You might have hepatitis, but you don't have this. And that's what I think needs to be done. And then, if you want to take those records, your medical records, and go to a lawyer who's brave enough to confront them, then you're in luck. I mean, it's It's pushing a rock up a hill, unfortunately, but there's guys and girls out there like me who will do it every day.
The problem has been hiring lawyers to petition the state. Like, in other words, people have gone through either the letterhead project, which I believe currently costs about $1,500, or they've been getting the Scarlet Letter do-it-yourself instructions, which I will post the links to both on the website. They've either done it themselves for free, or they've gotten OMSJ to document this up front, that there's no diagnosis. But the next step, I've asked Clark about it. So, okay, who's been successful in getting their names off the rolls? And he goes, well, nobody so far. I'm like, we've got a problem. He says, yeah, because they have to hire a lawyer. So that's been the problem. And also that hospitals sometimes charge outrageously expensive results per page to release medical records to patients. I know a person here in the city who's been trying to get records up in Plattsburgh, and they're like, oh, you have to pay $250 per page, and by the way, it's 500 pages of stuff. So she just can't afford to do that. But it shouldn't be hard, once the snowball gets rolling down that hill, to hire lawyers fairly cheaply for this kind of cookie cutter petition process, right? I mean, it's not like a specialized thing. But as you say, the part where you're pushing the rock up the hill is that there are barriers to this being the understanding among attorneys of the problems with HIV/AIDS theory. But once attorneys are educated, once maybe they've taken that one big paying case and they realize, oh, there are these all these little cases that we could charge a couple of $100 for, there might be a little cottage industry going on there.
Think about mesothelioma. It's the same idea. Any case like lung cancer causing case is now huge. Every law firm is advertising it on online and whatnot, on TV and whatnot. So yeah, so once that is correct, that once a case is taken off, it'll run. The snowball will go down to the hill. but it's going to take a lot of effort to get there. And it's going to take a lot of education to get there as well. But I believe in it, and I think that your listeners should believe in it as well and start to advance this cause.
Right. Clark Baker wrote a hilarious article about how the CDC disclaims itself from itself. I think that's the actual title. Have you seen that?
I actually have not. I have not.
It's on the OMSJ website, and I'll try to link to it. But it's kind of hilarious how they sort of say, well, here's HIV theory, but here's what we're not willing to say about. We're not willing to take responsibility for this fact. You need to consult a competent medical authority. Don't try to diagnose yourself through this information.
So,
we won't stand up for it in a court of law. It's our lawyers will get with your lawyers.
So we're saying you have an incurable infectious disease that is deadly, but we're not willing to say that it actually exists.
Let's put it this way. We're not saying it. We're just passing some innuendos to some reporters somewhere who are dumb enough to think that we're saying what we're saying. So we immunize ourselves against any such liability. We indemnify ourselves. If you're looking for somebody to sue, it ain't us. So it's just, and I tell people there are these disclaimers inside the HIV test kits, and they're like, well, I went to my doctor and they wouldn't even let me see it. Well, okay, so what good is a disclaimer if your doctor won't let you see it? But they have these disclaimers so that you can't sue the company that made the test, right? So they're on the outside, they're telling you you're crazy if you question this diagnosis. On the inside, through the back door, they're just they've hired lawyers who have written it such that they can't be sued. Now, why would they be worried about getting sued if they knew their product wasn't crap?
At the end of the day, I really think this comes down to money. I mean, it's a really sad statement to make that statement, but it's true. I really believe that the system is so rigged with the pharmaceutical industry and all the clinics across the country and all the government funding that it's just, once you, as I said, you can't push that rock up a hill when that rock is money, and it is money, and it's really frustrating. But maybe case by case, one by one. I don't want to quote Martin Luther King here, but just one by one, we'll get there.
Right. Well, let me submit to you this: that money there's about to be a change in that situation if the lawsuits start up, if the class actions start up, in that all that money is going to be flowing into verdicts. There's quite a sizable pile of money to sue for, and these things are well funded, and you can use that against them in a sort of legal judo, because I have no doubt that our friends at the NIH and are tuning into this podcast, or will be soon, and they are, to use another metaphor, shitting a brick, because, oh my God, they're saying this, and they see the dollar signs, they see how it's going to be flowing to some other people, namely their victims. So this is
Right.
a very powerful podcast. It is, and we should be very proud that we have informed people. And no, it's not like, you just call 1-800-lawyers or something on, late night TV and it gets done. There are issues to be dealt with, but in the final analysis, they're going to have to put up or shut up. And this is where it all ends. Where it ends is where the money flows.
I absolutely agree with that. I think that as I say, it's unfortunate, but the dollar signs, I think, are paramount here, and that's why they're unwilling to look at the science and to actually acknowledge the mistakes that we've made, and how it's devastated people emotionally and physically. I mean, because they failed to get other diagnoses that were actually correct,
right?
Or because they went out and did more risky behavior because they had no choice. All those things, the repercussions, the ripple effect of that is like throwing a rock in a pond. It's just the ripple effect is dramatic. So it's time for them to to own up to what they've done.
Well said. Thank you very much for joining us, Attorney Jonathan Dailey.
Thank you so much. Okay, bye.
Bye.
This has been another episode of How Positive Are You? Thank you for joining us. If you found our message inspiring, please be inspired in turn to give us your thoughts and feedback at info@howpositiveareyou.com, donate funds large or small, and inquire about advertising appropriate products or services on our website. Until the next time, be well, and remember, relax. It's just information.